Hello, angels. I'm behind again. Tremendously, extraordinarily behind in recording my year-end content. But rest assured, the albums of the year and the 2 hits videos, best hits and worst hits, are well underway and will hopefully be out soon. But for today, we are returning to another delightful piece of year-end content that I've been making for a few years now and talking about the best debut albums of 2024. The best artists who made a great first impression with their first full-length projects this year. This is an idea I came up with a few years ago when I noticed back in 2022 that there were stacks and stacks of debut albums I just adored and really wanted to talk about. And while that wasn't so much the case last year, I'm pretty happy with the bunch that we have here. It's not a year that's so good that I had to run up the numbers with a bunch of honorable mentions like the first time I talked about debut albums, but it is one that is through and through full of pretty solid records that I really enjoyed and artists that I think have a really promising future. So why waste any more time? Let's just get into it. These are my top 10 plus one debut albums of 2024. And as I always say in these videos, they will be obsolete basically the moment they are posted. The best debut albums, when we look back on this year a decade from now, nobody may have even heard yet. But take it for what it is. These are the artists that debuted loudly enough that I heard them, and promisingly enough that I'm really looking forward to what they have next. And a quick editorial note for these debut videos that I forgot to mention, though it has always been the case. I don't really include solo debuts or side project debuts from artists that were already famous with another band. This year, that most notably means no Beth Gibbons. Even though she dropped one of the best albums of the year of Portishead fame, it also means no Swanskin, no Elias Ronenfeld of Ice Age, Normani, obviously because of Fifth Harmony, and yes, no Jordy Griep. And at number 10, I'm going to cheat a little bit and list off 2 records here, 2 albums from singers and songwriters that are trying to bring a different variance of dance music, jungle, and drum and bass to their pop songs. And I think they both craft not only very unique sounds, but pretty interesting albums. And of course, that's Nia Archives with Silence to Loud and Kenya Grace with The Aftertaste. Starting with Nia, a British R&B and pop singer who has been bubbling in the underground for a while for her very vibrant, flavorful takes on jungle music with an utterly indelible voice and just one great hook after another. I will say that for both of these albums, really, I think they have the issue of deep cuts that seem like they're just trying to sound like the singles, but wow, are those singles promising. And the most promising single of the bunch comes from Kenya Grace with the track Strangers, which first really surprised me when it landed on the tail end of the Hot 100 last year. I had no idea who she was, but wow, was that song infectious. And it translated into a solid record where she, admittedly, tries to remake it a few times, but for the most part does it pretty well. I like both of these albums quite a bit, and I'm looking forward to what both of these singers have to do next. And at number 9, it has been a little bit of a longer build for R&B girl group trio Flow, who have released a handful of EPs over the past couple of years that I have liked quite a bit and been pretty loud about my affection towards. And yeah, they drummed out a few killer singles this year that resulted in their debut album, Access All Areas. You say you don't know that girl, so boy, I'll take your word. You can really say about this album the same stuff that you could about the trio's early work. The fact that their chemistry is incredible, that they are each talented individually, and they come together for great harmonies consistently throughout this album. And their songwriting is also just adorable, girlish, but fun, and from really inventive and really unique and interesting perspectives. These guys are great at finding a way to tell a story of love and lust and romance and find just a slightly new way to frame it that makes it more interesting than a lot of their contemporaries. And at number 8, breakthrough indie outfit Freako with their debut album, Where Have We Been? Where Do We Go From Here? Too old, too close to This is a band I had been hearing about in whispers quite a bit, but not one that I ever felt overwhelmingly compelled to check out until I started to see some of the very good coverage for this record, and yeah, for good reason. This is a pretty strong album that fans of the very vibrant, emotional, and occasionally quite wordy indie music of a band like Arcade Fire or Black Country New Road will definitely enjoy, though the instrumental presentation is much more stripped back, very raw. It has a very wintry aesthetic, and they play it quite well. Frico isn't exactly reinventing the wheel here. There is not one specific thing you can cite about their sound that is revolutionary, but for the most part, they do what they do very well, and they sound like an indie band that is wise beyond their years on this debut album. And at number 7, one of the most meme-laden debut albums of the year, the playful, raunchy, hilarious, vibrant, echo-astral record, Pink Balloons. This is a punk outfit who, in my opinion, have received quite a bit of acclaim for how fun and vibrant and referential their sound is, and yeah, it's great. They have a really distinct style, one that is playful and can be a little tongue-in-cheek, but the band is also more than capable of getting a little bit more serious, as they proved on a great follow-up single. But throughout this record, what entices me more than the subject matter is the ferocity, is the intensity, is the way that these refrains drill into my head and stick with me, and the viscera with which they're performed. It felt like there was a moment where Echo Astral was inescapable, with interviews and features in all kinds of hot indie magazines, so there's a good chance you heard about this band this year, but if you didn't take the chance to listen to them, you absolutely should. This album is quite good. At number 6, an album, one of two albums, I suppose, that I think a lot of people will expect to see on this list from the American side of that coin. We've got LA shoegaze outfit Julie with their breakthrough album, My Anti-Aircraft Friend. And my thoughts on this record really haven't changed much since I originally reviewed it. They have a shoegaze sound that is intense, vibrant, and detailed, though the attitude that the band delivers can be a little bit much sometimes. And additionally, it is extremely obvious on nearly all of their songs exactly where and who in the history of shoegaze they are trying to query from, but, you know, it's a debut album. They're very obviously inspired by certain outfits and their vintage shoegaze stylings. I think it's okay to wear some of those bands like My Bloody Valentine and Slowdive, just to name a few, on their sleeves. All I can hope for in a follow-up album is that the band manages to deliver the same level of intensity and infectious blur as this record while digging into a little bit more of what is their own defining sound. At number 5, take your fucking pick between the two Glorilla projects this year.
Pussy wet, good ass neck, that's me. So I talk how I want. Save a nigga who, bitch, do I look like fucking Superwoman? Cause my paper long. It's a Friday night. My nigga ain't home. I pull my bitch shots. Cause I don't drink alone. Hell no.
I wasn't actually head over heels for Glorilla's breakthrough EP a few years ago, and so I wasn't exactly foaming at the mouth for a follow-up, but wow, this mixtape she dropped earlier this year really knocked me on my ass. I was blindsided by how much I like this thing, how hard-hitting it is, how infectious the refrains are, and how unbelievably poised and confident Glorilla sounds. And then just 6 months later, she turned around and did it again on a just as solid debut album that features even more fantastic material. And while, gun to my head, I maybe like the mixtape a little better, you could go with either of these and get a collection of tracks that show off exactly why Glorilla is here and why she's here to stay, which certainly wasn't a guarantee at the start of 2024. In a year where Ice Spice dropped a debut album that flopped so tremendously we all forgot why we liked her in the first place, Glorilla reminded everyone that she has it. She just has it. At number 4, a weird, neurotic, Texas post-punk and indie rock outfit whose chain I have been banging loudly since last year, and that is Font with their debut album, Strange Burden. Yeah, this thing is a little bit scant. It is on the shorter side, and it features quite a bit of the material that the band had released as singles leading up to this, unsurprisingly. However, the results are fascinating. This band, from their very earliest singles, have always been very weird, very off-kilter, seemingly a little Talking Heads inspired, but also inspired by seemingly a lot of the same material that is giving this new wave of British post-punk its legs, and what it comes together into is this weird, playful, rocky, unpredictable, but kind of vibrant collection of tracks. And so, yes, I think it's probably a little difficult to imagine anyone vibing with this thing from minute one to minute done, given the weird ideas and diatribes that it goes down, the strange lanes that it occupies throughout the album, but it was just something that kept me on my toes and a pretty fantastic payoff for all of the momentum that the band had built up to this point, and a debut that I'm really happy with, and frankly, kind of surprised more people aren't talking about. If you haven't gotten the chance to check out Strange Burden yet, it's definitely worth it. At number 3, The Pilgrim, Their God, and the King of My Decrepit Mountain is, of course, the very long title of the debut album from UK folk outfit Tapir. From up here, I hear a melody. Someone pointed out to me in the last video where I talked about Tapir that I wasn't saying it with enough enthusiasm because it's an exclamation point at the end. So this is Tapir, who first caught my attention last year when they were releasing small collections of EPs that would eventually build up to their 3-part debut album. And while this thing didn't exactly land with the same conceptual ambitions that I thought it might, that didn't stop me from liking the results just as much. This is a gentle, swaying, very beautiful indie folk record at times, but one that is not afraid to be icy and jagged and challenging at others. It's this playfulness that allows them to be inspired by vintage and much more standard and familiar folk outfits in some of their most inviting moments, but unafraid to just get freaky with it occasionally, and not even ways that are challenging to listen to, ways that just feel indulgent, and yet it all adds up into an album that I really, really like. In fact, I went into this thing having already heard basically 2/3 of its tracklist released as EPs, and while they were good EPs, they didn't completely blow my mind or anything, and yet, just hearing this whole record front to back, it made me a Tapir fan instantaneously. With how much of the brooding, indulgent, and loud music has been coming out of the UK indie scene recently with this wave of post-punk revivalism, it is extremely refreshing to see something that is just as playful and creative and verbose, but also so willing to be quiet, intimate, and gentle. And there are so many catchy songs and memorable moments on this record that it has just stuck in my head all year long and is easily one of the best debuts I heard this year. But if there is only one UK artist whose debut album you are expecting to see on this list, it is probably the band at number 2, English Teacher, with This Could Be Texas. Despite appearances, I haven't got the voice for R&B, even though I've seen more colour shows than KEXPs. Yeah, this band is already racking up tons and tons of acclaim from critics and fans and award shows alike, and they fucking deserve it. What a fantastic, dynamic, versatile debut album they managed to put together. I think after hearing singles like R&B, there were a lot of fans that were expecting this to be wall-to-wall, throat-grabbing, intense moments from this band, and yet when they dial it back, they manage to be just as satisfying. That doesn't mean that a song like R&B isn't honestly one of my favorite things I heard this year, and a track that I can't get enough of, but it shows off an impressive measure of versatility and range, which is quickly becoming the theme of this list so long as you take Julie out. And yeah, that versatility plays out in really, really awesome ways, from the vibrant and fist-pumping moments that manage to drill their way into my brain to some of the quieter or more abrasive and jagged experiments that the band undergoes. What results is a really strong debut album that is both unpredictable and makes it difficult, or rather wide open, to anticipate where the band could possibly go next, but one that also does not need to be put into any broader context to be enjoyed. These songs are great. They hit right now, and this was one of the best indie and post-punk records I heard anywhere this year, period. What a strong debut from this band. I think there's a lot of people who will probably be surprised that English Teacher didn't top this list in a year like last year, where it was pretty clear that Model Actress's debut album could run laps around everybody else. It seemed like English Teacher may not have as much of a lead, but a sizable lead regardless. Though hear me out. If you are not depressed or transgender or like a terminally online rate your music user, let me tell you a story you may not have heard about yet. A few years ago, right at the crust of the pandemic, there was suddenly such a refreshing and re-engaged interest in DIY music, bedroom genres of music. We saw so many hits that took off on TikTok, so many great underground artists to get their start in this era, because the lockdown was sort of forcing a lot of people to work creatively in intimate spaces, the likes of which they had never had to deal with before. And one of the biggest critical darlings of this era turned out to be a brief EP, but an extremely challenging, divisive, and eventually extremely beloved one from a Scrams and Screamo outfit called Your Arms Are My Cocoon. It's actually this EP right here. And it's one that I have had a surprising amount of time to fall head over heels in love with, to the extent that these songs meant so much to me that it felt like the band had been around for decades. And I'm certainly not the only person to express that sentiment, as I've been talking to music fans all year. And the new album that the band released, which is, objectively, their debut, didn't even strike a whole ton of people as being a debut album. But through the rules, through the glimmer of what I have given myself, it objectively qualifies. And in that case, it just ran away with it. My favorite debut album of the year, by a pretty large margin, is Your Arms Are My Cocoon's Death of a Rabbit. Despite being at the top of this list and the best album I'm going to talk about today, this is not one that I can blindly recommend to just about anybody. If you pop into my videos once a year to hear me talk about Taylor Swift or the Hot 100, this record might be a little bit outside your wheelhouse. And that is because it is an extremely raw, jagged, and ripping Scrams record, taking the aesthetic of Screamo and stripping it down to its absolute barest essentials with really, really painful, difficult themes explored throughout the music, as you'd expect, but paired with this shockingly, extremely lo-fi demeanor that is so uncompromisingly jagged. This record is difficult to listen to in the way that if you are not familiar with Scrams as a concept, it may sound like it's trying to be annoying on purpose. I've certainly heard that from a few what I'll defensively call normies that have overheard me listening to the record. But once you're willing to give yourself to the album's whims and indulgences and understand why it is as rough around the edges in its presentation as it is, it becomes such a raw, such a poetic and visceral emotional experience that I think is irresistible. Not only does it build on the concepts explored on the Breakthrough Your Arms Are My Cocoon EP, but it also manages to maintain some of the dynamics that made that EP such a modern classic, such an utter delight to listen to. And honestly, altogether, I just think this is spectacular, fantastic. It's probably going to land in my top 10 albums of the year. And while it may not feel like a debut for some because we've been sitting with these other Your Arms Are My Cocoon songs for 4 full years at this point, it is a debut album. And it is a debut so good that it could very well be my favorite debut of the whole goddamn decade so far. So that is it. That is the list. Those are my 11 favorite debut albums of this year. And you can go into the comments and tell me what your favorite debut is. And if the band that you comment eventually becomes a beloved critical darling, you will have a testament, a time and date stamped testament to being there before they were cool. And that is a pretty enticing offer. And I will be back soon, hopefully very soon, like extremely, very, really soon, with the worst hits of the year video. Kisses.